Hello, this is going to be my first tutorial and this is going to be on shading. So over here I have a flat version of the character I'm drawing, and on the right I have a character with line art, but she has a white layer with alpha lock. And on top of the alpha lock I have a clip layer for multiply mode shading. So the reason why I have the character just in white is so that I can block out shadows. And I feel that to make a character with good shadows, you need to make impactful shadow shapes, if that makes sense. So you want to first make a direction of light. So for this example, I'm going to have the light coming from the top right direction. So the light is going to be coming down here, and the shadow is going to be placed over here, but right below the chin, for example. So we're just going to block out shadows for now. So for basic shadows, typically in anime, you would have a really strong shadow right underneath the neck. Shadows underneath the hair strands, usually you would go from very thick from up here to thinner. The reason being is that your bangs are further away on top of your forehead, so that casts a bigger shadow, right? Similar thing to the chin. Because if you draw it like this, let's say like this is the chin right here and this is the neck, right? You're going to have light being casted from up here, so your shadows will go down and hit your chin. Now, if you apply this to basically any shape, you can basically make shadows for anywhere, any place you want, right? So same principles of the hair shape, right? You have the head that's blocking the ponytail, so you would add shadow on top of the ponytail. You also have a shadow here because light is coming from up here, right? And that also helps out to block out entire shapes like this. This makes the piece look a lot more dynamic. So I would just have her arm slightly behind her right arm in particular. Same thing with this arm right here. You would have a shadow being casted by the arm onto the shirt. And you had some shadows underneath the sleeves. Some shadows on the shape of the arm. Also, having the layer be white like this and blocking out shapes like this allows you to better focus on the shapes than the colors, right? So you're more aware of like, hey, what is the shape like? What shadow would cast? Also, I find it important to use your line art to your advantage when you're doing shading, right? Say for example here, you don't want to overshade your hair. You don't want to do this, right? Because in anime style, you keep it really simplistic. So what you would want to do is to use the lines you already have for hair and guide shadows up like this. Very simple strands. As for the bangs, same thing. If you want her bang to be sticking out, right, it's not going to be blocked by the face, so you just have this. But if the bang is going to be behind her face, then you would block the entire strand like this. And keep in mind that the shapes for the hair, they're relatively round, so you would want to make a curve like this. Just like how in a sphere, you would when you make a shadow, curve stuff like this, right? So we want something like that. Now, something to make your drawing elevate is if you add little shadows, little details on the clothing. For example, her shirt is a little bit loose, so she's going to be having some ambient inclusion, right? This means that the place where your shirt and your chest is not going to have any light, so there's going to be a very light shadow. If you want, you can also add a little bit of shadow underneath the eyelashes to add a little bit of depth to your eyes, and add a little shadow underneath your nose, one underneath the lip, and a very small line around the face because the face is also round too. Oh, and I forgot the palm of this hand is also facing away from the light, so you can just do this. Also keep in mind that not everything has to be accurate, as long as it looks close enough, as long as it makes sense, you know? Try to keep to your direction of light, and your drawing and shadows should be consistent. Now on to the next part. I'm going to just duplicate this drawing. What I did is Ctrl+C+V, the folder that contains my character. And now I'm going to work on this. So now that we have our basic block art ready, we can actually shade on top of the piece. So on all of my layers, let me expand this. I'm going to alpha lock all of these. Okay, so for beginners, I would recommend using a multiply layer. And what you want to do is, let me expand this also, is for picking shades, you will want to pick something that is left or right of the color wheel, right? And I'll clarify that more later on. So for something like skin color, when you want to do shadows, you will want to go more red. So you would go down on the left side, right? And multiply layer is really useful for shading. What it does is it takes whatever hue you're coloring in, and when you color over it, oh, 1 second, I forgot to make a new layer. I made a new layer, clipped it over the skin color, which is over here. So it takes the current color you're shading and you color over it, it makes the color underneath darker, right? Oh, whoops, I wasn't using multiply. Now this is multiply, right? Okay. And then when I make it to normal, you can see how it's a little bit lighter. And multiply. Same color. We'll put over here for comparison. So this makes it easier for you because you don't have to think about if the color I'm using is correct, because when you're using multiply, the color you're coloring with will always be darker when you're overlaying it, right? So that's good. Now, when you're picking a color for multiply, I would advise you to go left on the color wheel, right? Left or right. And then go a little bit more saturated. So more saturated means a little bit more right in the color square, right? And a little bit just tad darker, right? And the cool thing is you can adjust the opacity of the multiply layer. So if that's too dark, you can just go a bit lighter like this. Now, try not to go into the gray areas because that would make your shadows a lot more dull. And you don't quite want that. You want the warmth of the skin. So you would want to stick to warm, a little bit darker, a little bit dull shadows, but not too dull like this. So I like this color, I'm going to stick with that, right? So I'm going to use my blockout, and I'm going to basically copy over the colors. Now, something else you can also do is you see how I have this blockout layer on its own layer? You can copy and paste this over. So copy and pasted the layer. Let's turn this to multiply. I hid the layer I was working on and alpha lock this multiply layer. Oh, let me move this up top too. I have to move this on top of the hierarchy, so this shadow will come up top. Okay, not going to lie. It's going to be a bit to place this correctly. 1 second. Okay, this is messy. Usually it'd be easier because I'd be working on directly on the same character, so I wouldn't have to move the layers like this. But basic idea is something like this, right? You can apply the multiply layer mode and alpha lock it and change the colors. This is a bit messy right now because I moved it. So you can use the same multiply layer over here and use it on top of the skin layer, the clothing layer, and the hair layer. Instead, I like to shade on a new layer. That's my personal preference. Because I can also just refine the shapes as I see please and change it up, right? So I'll just do it real quick for the sake of this tutorial. Remove this line here. Okay. I'm going to essentially do the same thing with the other layers. Same thing with hair, with warm colors. I'm going to make multiply layer and make it red, right? Because brown's already a warm color, and you want it to be more warm when you're applying shadows. That's for me, at least. You can also apply cool shadows if you want to. That's a little bit too saturated. The hair is already dull, so I want to go for a more dull color. A little bit too dark. This is fine, right? And the nice thing about multiply layer, and when you're making a new layer, is you can just erase the existing shadow. And what I do is I press C to switch from a color to a transparency. So your brush would act like an eraser, but with the same brush tip. Now, for a shirt, for cool colors, I would make a multiply layer and I would do more purple, right? So you go left on the color wheel. A general gist is if you're starting off with the base color that is yellow to blue, you move right on the color wheel. So for yellows, you will want greenish shadows. For green, you want bluish shadows, and for blue, you want purple shadows. While for actually yellow, it depends on the hue, right? So say like you want to be a little bit cooler shadows, you go green. Want warm shadows, you want red. While for reds and pinks, you would go to the left here. So for orange, you would go red. Red, you go to pink purple. And the pink purple goes to blue. That's how my basic shading works. But as you can see with colors like yellow, you would have a little bit more of leeway depending on the context. That is its own tutorial on its own actually. So back to the shirt. You can go a little bit blue over here, go a little bit darker. It's a little bit too vibrant for me. That's nice. Oh, I forgot to color the skin over here. But what you can do is Control Shift left click the shadow you're working on, or jump to the multiply layer you're working on, and then change your eyedropper setting to pick up color from layer. And what this basically does is it takes the colors that you were working with and multiply. So you can have it right here and shade it on. So you don't have to guess the color you're working on and place the wrong shadow. Same thing right here. I just Control Shift left click, get on the layer I'm working on, and then pick color from layer. You can see that I'm not using the eyedrop menu. I only use it to change the modes. Otherwise, I would just do Alt left click to get the color I'm working with. There you go. Now this step is done. I'm going to copy and paste this layer. I hope this is the right thing. Next thing you can do is, let me clean this up a bit. Next thing you do is you blur the edges of the shadows. Let me give you a very simple shape to demonstrate what I mean. So say that you have an overhang, like a building, right? And it's sunny outside, and it's casting a shadow over here. So this is the side where the sunlight hits it, and then you have shadows, right? Now, light has a phenomena where if the source of the shadow is farther away, then the edge of the shadow gets blurrier. So since this is relatively far away, you add a little bit of blur to the edge. But as the shadow gets closer, say over here, right, you would soften up the edge. I mean, it would be more sharp over here, and the farther away it gets, the more blurry it gets. Now you would apply the same principle to people. Same thing with the shadows over here. The shadow, the edge of the shadow, closer to the neck, stay sharp. The farther away it is, the blurrier it gets. So currently I have my blur tool. You have the shortcut on my pen. So I can easily switch to the blur tool, right? And I'm going to soften up the edges over here. I can do the same thing on top of the hair. Or up here. Or actually, no, I like the edge to be sharp over here because it's technically a hair strand, right? Instead, I'll do it over here because I'm going to treat the ponytail as a mass. So what we're going to do is to blur over here. The reason being is that your ponytail is round, so you're going to apply the same principle as you would to a sphere, because when you shade a sphere, the edges will be really blurred. It's not going to be sharp. Same thing over here with the bangs casting a shadow on your ponytail. You're going to add some blur over here. Now, this doesn't look like much, but overall, when you do this more and more often, it makes your character look more convincing if you want to go for a more realistic look while not over blurring. A common issue is when you over blur and it makes the shadows look very undefined, and you don't want to lose its definition, which is why we made a block out of these shadows in the first place. So, moving on. Also, I want to note that this tutorial will look very simple to the one I make on paper as a PNG, because I want to do this in a timely manner. I don't want to keep you guys waiting for the tutorial. So now I'm going to add darker shadows. I'm going to Control Shift left click onto the shadow I'm working on, Alt color pick, and then I'm going to pick a darker shade by dragging the, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Sometimes the jar just gets a little bit finicky because you can click some shortcuts and something else would happen. Anyways, Control Alt left click, and Alt left click to color pick, and you get the current shade that you're working on for the multiply layer on the skin. You take this color, drag to the right bottom to get a darker shadow. Now for this, you're going to add darker shadow, so you're going to apply it very thinly. Oh, this is showing very lightly because of the current opacity I have it at. What you can do is make a new multiply layer, clip it, and then use that color. And you do this. And you realize the color's too dark, no problem, just lower the opacity. Or you can change the color up here to make it lighter. But for time's sake, good old time's sake, I'm going to just make it the opacity lower. So darker shadows just go along the edge, basically. I'm going to do the same thing for the shirt. Forgot to clip it. There you go, I clipped it. Again, you would like to use the liner as guidelines, particularly for anything that's flowy. It has less direction, like a shirt or hair, right? Now for hair, I don't want to add darker shadow because the shadow you currently have is very much dark as is. What you can do, an easy way to shade is to add a gradient. So again, I'm going to get a multiply layer and get a little bit darker shade. And shade on top of it. The color's too vibrant, so I'm going to dull it a bit. And you can see how it adds this immediate definition to the hair while keeping the top light. If you don't like a color that you're working with, for example, the color I'm using right now is a little bit too red, you can lock, alpha lock the current layer you're working on, and change the color. So just alpha lock it over and color it over. And there you go. I have a less vibrant color that's a little bit more dull, a little bit more darker, but nonetheless brings the hair to life, right? Now next, an easy hack for making areas brighter is using Glow Dodge. What Glow Dodge does is it makes bright areas brighter while keeping dark areas dark. So I'm going to apply this to the hair because the hair is very dark, so you can easily see the changes that happen. So I'm going to do Glow Dodge, and I would want, let's say, like a yellowish light. So I'm going to pick a yellow color. Now keep in mind, the lighter the color you go, the stronger the effect will be. Right? So you can see how when I shade it over, it keeps the shadows, right? While making the light browns lighter. Now if I do this with AddGlow overall treats every color underneath the same. So it just lightens the dark browns like it does to the light browns. Also, one more thing I like about Glow Dodge is it applies a little bit more color. So it is neat what you can do with it. You can do the same thing with the shirt using Glow Dodge. Just make it very light. For things like Glow Dodge, I use the default airbrush from CSP, the soft airbrush, so that if you use any effects, it's very delicate, you know. Now, a neat thing to make your character much more atmospheric is adding a screen effect. So you know how there are characters in anime scenes where they appear a little bit more blue and dull? You can easily add this effect by making a layer that covers the entire character, clip it over, make a screen layer, get a light blue color, and airbrush over it. This can also work to make a character blend in more with the background. So say that she's in a green forest, right? You can add a green. It helps the character to not pop out as much, basically. But for this tutorial's sake, I'm not going to add a screen. Now, a nice finishing touch is tone curves. In my opinion, tone curves they do deserve its own tutorial, so I won't dive that much into it. But you basically get tone curves by going to the top left layer option, click on it, and then click on new correction layer, and then click on tone curves. And basically you can use this menu to tune your colors. So say I'm going to drag down, I'm not sharing my whole screen, but I will make a tutorial on it later. But say that you will have a curve, right? And you can drag it up and down to make the curve dip down or dip up, right? So when you dip up, it desaturates the colors. Dip down, not desaturate, it gives a lighter contrast. And when you dip down, it gives a stronger contrast, right? So this is a really good tool to help finish off your art. But yeah, this is my tutorial for shading. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Patreon, any social media, Discord. And yeah, I hope you guys find this helpful. Thank you.